let's pull out a standard and let's look at that standard K to 12. We don't have time or energy to do it with every single standard, but I'd like us to look at B, and I'd like us to look at the verbs, because parallel reference to that the cognitive demand is changing in these standards. And I go from discuss with adult assistants in kinder. I keep the verb discuss through grade 2. That verb then becomes explain in 3-4. It becomes analyze from 5 to English 2, and then it shifts to evaluate. So we have to be cognizant of what comes before us in the grade level. First of all, the first year of adoption, there are gaps to fill. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I say it everywhere that I go. The 5 most dangerous words in education are, they should be able to. We can't keep saying, kids should be able to do this. First, we have all new standards. So we have to fill gaps that weren't filled before. But also, my challenge all the time is, our job title is teacher. Teach them how. Don't complain about the fact that there is a gap. Fill the bucket. Be a bucket filler. So when I look at that, I think about explaining this to teachers. How do we get to evaluate by 12 when we start with discuss? So I was thinking about this, and I love everything to do with the zoo. I would spend a lot of time there if I could. So if I move from if I start with discuss, has anybody here been to the zoo? Let's discuss what you did at the zoo. And that becomes this certain level of conversation. But then I change the narrative when I say, explain to me what you liked about going on that field trip to the zoo. And then if I ask you to analyze the difference between the giraffe habitat and the elephant habitat, now I'm piling on different cognitive tasks. And then if I finally got to evaluate how society views a zoo, if I just start with that conversation and I look at what that standard B does all the way across, we are changing the cognitive discourse when it comes to looking at a text. So look at your grade level, and I want you to think about, and it doesn't have to be just the B standard, how the cognitive differences are changing with these new standards.
Whenever I look at discuss, one of the things that I would do in designing a lesson on purpose is that there are certain lesson structures that lend themselves to discussion. A Socratic seminar. Yeah. There are certain lesson structures that lead to analysis. I'm thinking typicast for poetry. And so these verbs can guide us and send us as teachers to look for instructional design, lesson design features that can achieve the goals that are here. And so maybe we start building our repertoire as teachers of what are the lesson design features that are most suited toward the verbs that are in the standards.
Well, and one of the things we've talked a whole lot about with the knowledge and skills statement is that every single one of them is a reading teak and a writing teak, but it also includes the listening, the speaking, and the thinking. And when we start with those discussions at the lower levels, we're teaching students how to have conversations, how to listen, how to think in a lower risk way before they're asked to do it where they're explaining and analyzing. So we're starting at that low level where students are doing those discussions, but we train them how to have those conversations. We might use sentence stems. We might use some ways to get students just started with those conversations so that they can communicate with each other effectively.
When I look at that strand B, it really, to me, it leads into that inquiry piece. They're tied together. A discussion can take you so many places. And just from a question, you can get a 30-minute conversation with students. And then you get to see into their eyes and their world who's had that experience, who can carry that skill over, who can help someone else. They all tie together, and the complexity of the text will change as they begin to move up grades. But if we build that foundation with discussion, that opens the door for our 12th graders, our 9th graders, our 7th graders, even our 5th graders to be able to master these standards. And that's where we're trying to get them, is to mastery. We can't do that if we never discuss it. It has to be said out loud, talked about, looked at. We have to write about it. We need to read about it. We need to have multiple sources from that. And it just stems from a discussion. If I ask the right question, what can I get from that?
You guys bring up a lot of good points, and we're looking at this from what we can learn, or what can we challenge a child to do. This is going to require us to do a lot more thinking as a teacher about how effectively that we can evaluate what a kid is saying to see what they understand or what they do not understand. You do have to have discussion so that they can have a clear understanding of what it means so that we can analyze, we can go forward. And as a teacher, if you're not listening carefully for what type of, how complete a child is understanding a topic, he can't analyze, he can't evaluate. And so a teacher has to dissect now more. And so these strands are just as challenging for a teacher, so they can evaluate what a kid is understanding and where they miss it, so we can pick them back up when it comes down to closing gaps and such.
I heard a speaker the other day say, it's not about coverage, it's about comprehension. And so it can't be about, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to teach, I have to make sure they read Diary of a Wimpy Kid, I have to make sure that they read 5 to 1, I have to make sure that they read How Soccer Changed the World. I have to make sure it's not about coverage. It is about comprehension. So I want you to look at this strand as a whole. How do all the moving parts in this strand change how we talk about text with students? What formative assessment opportunities do you see here that help you gauge where students are and how they're learning? Because this strand changes how we talk about text.
Well, one of the things that I've probably noticed the most is that if I'm using a mentor text that we are reading, then I need to be able to use that same mentor text in writing. So I've got to have the knowledge of what we're doing as readers to be able to inform what we're going to be doing as writers. And I also see that this really ties to those response skills, which we've already covered before, but it also, all these strands all intermingle together, because it really does change the way we think about this, and it integrates so many pieces of literacy together. It takes away all the segmentation that we have done for so long, to where we're reading this, we're writing this, and kids aren't seeing the cohesion. They're not seeing the connections. This is going to cause teachers to really think about, how do I make that connection for students? How do I help them see and apply this when they read and when they write?
So in the author's purpose and craft, each one of these standards, each one of these student expectations, I believe lend itself for a very holistic approach to texts. So where you're looking at the author's purpose and message, that's really driven by all the other things that the author has done. What choice of words has the author selected? In what structure, what organizational pattern has the author chosen to use? And then what are those graphic and print features? And once and for all, this interconnectedness will lead us to understand what voice really is, and how all of that helps voice and mood come through. I was thinking about the cognitive demand and how that increases. And John, you talked about the implications that it has for the teacher. And so as we deconstruct these standards, and we see, namely in the intermediate grades, where we go in 4th grade from explain to 5th and 6th grade to analyze, well, that implicates how we are going to teach it, how we ourselves understand the text. are we as teachers able to identify that text structure that the author has chosen? And Shona, you talked about the tools that then we would use, or the lesson delivery method we would use. In addition, what supports are we providing students, especially our most fragile children? Are we using specific graphic organizers that will help them understand the specific text structure of that piece that we're going to talk about?
So for example, for in the lower grades, if we're talking about discussion, we as teachers need to be able to know what discussion really means. So what are the instructional tools I'm gonna use to make that effective? And going back to questioning, going back to, okay, what does discussion sound like, look like in my classroom, right? And what is the end in mind? What do I expect my kids to know? I need to be able to model. Where am I need to take them? I need to model. I need to make it, I need to know the meaning of it. I need to transfer the meaning for my students so they be able to know. Then it doesn't become a checklist, you know, and then I take opportunities across, right? So I'm able to discuss across content, and then I'm able to explain, and I'm able to move on.
I agree with every part that y'all have all been discussing. I feel like this is more of a mind shift. We truly have to change the way that we have been taught to teach and how to teach. Laura mentioned earlier that we truly need to slow down. I believe instead of just rushing through this one great story, the kids are bored, I'm gonna stop reading this text after 1 week and stop teaching characterization. There's so much more that the author did in this story, in this textbook, in this book, for the child to learn from. And I feel like if we can just use that and grow from that as teachers and educators, take out the checkbox, like you mentioned earlier, and truly dive in. I feel like a book isn't just words in it. There can also be true meaning behind it. And it can also I look at it more as like teachers are life changers using a book. The child isn't just looking at the words, like this truly, the child must connect with the book. If they become one with the book, they're able to then express themselves through this standard of author's purpose and craft. They're able to show their voice, find the voice within the author, and then they're able to find their own voice through this. So listening to all of y'all, the teaching aspect, we're not just teachers of teaks and content. This is where I got to the point of we're teachers, like we're life changers. We're teachers of how to be able to express yourself through text, through books. And I feel like we can build so many relationships with this.
So, I mean, that's exactly what we're gearing towards. And Norma just said something really that struck me. She's like, we're going to have to do a lot of modeling. And I may become a little preachy right now, but we teachers are going to have to become readers and writers ourselves. Mm-hmm. We cannot wait till we hit that classroom to decide, oh, we're going to write with our kids. We cannot wait to that classroom to decide, oh, we're going to read this and that's going to be it. And I know life gets crazy. I know life, but we have to be readers and writers, or else we're not going to be able to model for them effectively. And what are we going to do? Just sit around and talk about a book for a while? I mean, that's not going to do anything for them. So we have to be making those solid connections for them.
It also takes me back to the introduction statements, to where it talks about authentic texts. And being in several classrooms, I know we tend to get into the star mode of practicing passages. But think about how that authentic text, if we start that with students and we're really picking really great books. And I think we kind of get into a rut a lot of times as teachers. Well, we've always used this text, or this is the text I've always used to teach this. We've got to broaden our view and our inquiry into looking at different authors and different texts and different genres, because it's very easy for us to get in a rut too. So if we're able to expose kids to these, when they do get to those specific test type genres, they'll be able to access those because they've had such authentic text presented to them as well.